Okay, principles of thermal cooking. We have thermal mass, the insulator, temperature, and timing. So thermal mass is the amount of, okay? So let's say that we have we have soup that we put in a thermal cooker, we put it on the stove, and the heat's gonna go into the soup, right? We take it off the stove and the heat's gonna go out of the soup. That's just how it works. With thermal cooking, what we do is we add insulation between heating it up and then we take it off and put it in an insulator. So what it does is it traps that heat and extends the amount of time your food will stay hot. And for a certain amount of time, it will continue cooking. So this is what it looks like. You've got your food your heat going into your soup or whatever it is. Then you put it into an insulator. And then as the heat comes out, it's going to come out more slowly because it's trapped in there and it's insulated. So that's really all that we're doing when we do retained heat cooking. When we insulate a pot, you can see I have two. Oh, okay. So I have two cookers here. One's big and one's little, the pot's on the outside. The thermal cookers in the middle are both the same size. So imagine bringing those pots to boil. And if they come to a boil, the small one will always boil sooner than the large one because there's less thermal mass or less water in there to bring up to temperature. So it will always boil first. It will always cool the soonest also. For the same reason, there's less thermal mass, and so there's less heat to go out. There's just less. Okay, so is it possible to have the small pot retain heat as long as the large pot? Obviously, I said how. So there is definitely you can. I have 3 solutions to that. If you have a small pot and you want to retain heat longer, you want to increase the amount of your insulation. So this right here are 2 Saratoga Jack thermal cookers. One is a 7-liter, one is a 5.5. And these retain heat about the same because the smaller 5.5-liter thermal cooker has more insulation in it to compensate for less thermal mass. The other thing you can do is increase the quality of your insulation. So there's different qualities of insulators, and this one, you have the basket with blankets. That's not going to be nearly as efficient as so many other ways of doing it. This stainless steel one is a Mr. D thermal cooker. They're out of England, and it's a vacuum seal. Vacuum seal is the most efficient way to retain heat, is using a vacuum or sense of air, right? There's no air in there, and it's the most efficient way to do it, but it still has it can't always, depending on the size of the pot, is still going to affect the effectiveness of the cooker. So this particular one is a 3-liter pot, which is awesome for less people, okay? Because those 7-liter pots make a whole lot of food. So this little one, the 3-liter one, retains heat about the same as the bigger ones. And that's because it has a better insulator, but it also has a second thing, which is my third thing that you can do, and that is add extra thermal mass. So what Dave has done is he added this cast iron base on the pot itself, which retains more heat and adds more thermal mass. And those 2 combinations of a better insulator and better thermal mass, or more thermal mass, make that little cooker as effective as the bigger ones, and really opens up a world to people that have to cook for 2 or 3 or 4 people, where the big ones, you're eating the same thing for much too long because you make a big pot of food. Okay. Temperature at sea level, boiling point's 212 degrees, and so at my house it's 205. Okay, so if my boiling point's 205 and the cooker loses 5 degrees, a lot of these cookers lose around 5 to 6 degrees an hour. After 8 hours at my house, my temperature's still 165 degrees. And why am I even talking about temperature? The reason I'm talking about temperature is because of food safety. We want to make sure that our food stays safe. I've never actually had my food be too cold when I open it, because I know the principles I'm looking at, and I've known when my food needs to be taken out. If it's 165, I still have 25 degrees that I can let it cool down 25 more degrees before I'm in danger of needing to put it in the fridge or heat it back up or get it eaten. So that's another, 3 or 4 hours. Once it starts cooling down, it'll cool down a little faster. So you want to make sure and pay attention, but at the same time, I haven't had this be an issue, which has been awesome. All right, timing and boiling. So boiling and waiting. But as far as if you had a big pot of stew, or if you had something that's coming to a boil and the whole thing's boiling, like traditional thermal cooking, the timing in the boiling time, I determine based on obviously the food I'm putting in it, but a lot of times I do it on the meat. Okay, let's say I'm doing a freeze-dried dehydrated meal and it doesn't have any meat in it at all. It's going to just need to come to a boil, and then I can put it into my thermal cooker. Okay, it needs to come to a nice rolling boil, and then just stick it in the thermal cooker. It's good to go. If I have a chunk of meat that's about an inch thick or so, then I would do at least a 4-minute boil. Is it going to hurt if I do it longer? No. But for preparedness and saving fuel, I need at least 4 minutes. And I let that boil, and then I can take it off and put it in the thermal cooker. If I go thicker, like 2 inches or 2.5 inches thick, like if I had a roast, and I cut it thicker like this, I just cut it thick instead of having it round. And I cut it like this. The reason I'm cutting it is so that I don't have to boil it so long. Okay, I'm trying to save fuel, because remember, I'm all about fuel savings. So if I do that, it's at least a 10-minute boil, a 10 to 12-minute boil. 10 should do you just fine. And then I would take the whole thing off and put it in a thermal cooker in the insulator part. If I had a roast that's like round, like this, okay, it's about a 25-minute boil. And that just gives you an idea of how long to let them boil. There's a few other items like beans, you want a 10-minute boil. I do my rice, a 3-minute boil, although it's not necessary. I've learned that from my Kenya trip. It just needs to make sure to come to a nice rolling boil. Anyway, that gives you an idea. How long do they wait? Most things, I leave them, like I mentioned before, I leave them for 2 hours or longer. It's all about my convenience. When do I want to open them up and eat it? That's really what I do. That's how I think about it. That's how I do it. There's a few things that need to stay in there longer. Dry beans need to stay in there a good 6 hours. A pot roast, I like to keep it in there at least that long also. But most things are 1.5 hours, 2 hours, you should be good to go. Obviously, a freeze-dried dehydrated meal, you're 45 minutes or whatever. You're just letting that set up. It's going to be almost ready. Some of the things you're going to do, you're just using it as a warmer, just because of the nature of it's already cooked, really. You're just marrying those flavors together. Once it hits a certain temperature, it becomes a warmer anyway. That's why you're able to leave it in there for as long as you want. Yogurt doesn't come to a full boil, and my book talks about yogurt. It also, I leave that in at least 11 hours because I've taken out earlier. And it's too thin, but the more I leave it in there, the longer it gets nice and thick. So I like to leave that in about 11 hours. And yogurt, thermal cooker is awesome for yogurt.